Well, thank you. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge my mayor is here, Mayor Simon Yu from Prince George. Thank you for coming. And yeah, all right. So I think I'll just begin with a few things and then I'll introduce the panel and we'll begin. We're here. What we're talking about here is just, I think it's one of the most important things that the entire penwork conversation is about, and that's about transportation and infrastructure. And transportation impacts every single thing. How are you going to do anything if you don't have a way to get your stuff anywhere and your people anywhere? It impacts every business, every employer, and every person you hire. It's the single biggest factor in our economy for our way of life and on our daily life. It lowers, if we have efficient systems and appropriate systems, it lowers the cost of transportation, and it will lower the cost of your business, doing business. If you remove the pinch points, then you help businesses thrive and grow. If you provide good transportation options for people, then your talent pool grows. So I would like to introduce, I've got Rachel up first. Are you prepared to go first? Or no, Leann, sorry. I knew I was messing that up. But since, yeah, let's go with Leann first. And Leann is the Director of Communications and Government Relations of Western Canadian Shortline. No, I'm reading Rachel's introduction. Sitting in the wrong order. That's my excuse. Leann Wagner, Chief Operator. This is for a very... I think, okay, I've got Leann and then Peter, I think. And then Paul and then Rachel, I think I've got. That's my scope. We're doing a dance first. Very good. I think we've got it.
Switching.
Speaking of switching. Yes. All right. Okay. Let me start again with Leann. You're here to talk about something incredibly exciting. She's the Chief Operating Officer for Transportation and Economic Corridors and Assistant Deputy Minister for Planning, Grants, and Engineering Services for the Government of Alberta. Thank you, Leann.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to speak to you this morning about Alberta's Passenger Rail Master Plan that we recently released probably last month, I think. Feels like a long time ago. So I'm pleased to present and share with you what the work we've done to date and what our next steps are for connecting our communities, particularly between the Highway 2 corridor. May I ask, are you advancing the slides or... Oh, okay, perfect. This is the connector. Great, thank you. So why passenger rail at this time for Alberta? Why are we talking about building and expanding passenger rail for the province of Alberta? Well, currently about 5 million people call Alberta home. Current population projections suggest that that's going to grow to 7 million over the next 20 years. We also expect that most of those folks will live in the Edmonton-Calgary corridor. Alberta is highly urbanized and will become even more urbanized as our population increases. And over 86% of the population lives in that Calgary-Edmonton corridor. Passenger rail has always been seen as, and our work has confirmed that it will help promote economic growth in the province. It will sustain sustainable growth in our two major cities and along that corridor, and will improve land development and the value of land, and hopefully improve how we develop land, particularly making it more dense in our two major cities. And we want to be able to have a safer and more resilient transportation system. Currently, transportation between Edmonton and Calgary is reliant on Highway 2 or air travel between the two cities and or bus travel, private public transit between those two communities. So the government announced that it was interested in pursuing planning for passenger rail. This has been going on in Alberta, fits and starts for a number of years. And the government decided, well, instead of fits and starts, like, actually let's do a serious engagement. Let's go out and talk to Albertans. Let's go talk to our municipal partners and other stakeholders about what a passenger rail system might look like in Alberta. How might we construct that? What might, do people even support us going in this direction? And so for about a year, the province had a significant engagement and planning effort underway, including a feasibility assessment of, is it possible, is it even realistic for us to consider having any kind of rail connection between these two cities? I think most of us imagine Alberta to be, I think a lot of folks don't realize how urbanized Alberta is and how much traffic is moving between Edmonton and Calgary, particularly passenger traffic. Is it financially feasible for us to build passenger rail in Alberta? And how might we deliver that and operate passenger rail? And then out of that engagement came a series of options and recommendations for government to consider. What we heard overwhelmingly is that Albertans support the development of passenger rail. Yeah. They want rail connections along that corridor, but they also want better rail connections in the metropolitan areas. If you're familiar with Edmonton or Calgary, they do have, are surrounded by suburban communities, and almost exclusively the way to get from the, say here in Edmonton, from Sherwood Park to the east and St. Albert from the north is by car. There is some bus service, but it mostly is for commuter travel. So overwhelmingly we heard we should do this. We also heard overwhelmingly that we should evolve to a model that's similar to what is happening in other jurisdictions. And if you're Canadian, you'd be familiar with Toronto's Metrolinx model, which most stakeholders said that's where we should evolve to. We should have the governance, operations, funding outside of the provincial government and into an agency. Where we heard the two priorities for Albertans was, of course, connecting Edmonton and Calgary via Red Deer, and then connecting the two airports to their downtowns were the two priorities identified by Albertans. So we went through a fairly significant process. I'm not an engineer by training, so I hope you don't have any engineering kinds of questions. This was heavily engineering oriented. I have been briefed on it a number of times. It still feels very technical to me, but we winnowed it down from a 60-year, what would 60-year time frame look like, and what would a 30-year time frame look like. In the end, we chose a 30-year time frame for building out passenger rail, feeling it was the most realistic based on the population growth that we are experiencing in the province. The plan, a summary of the plan was released in June and is publicly available if you are interested. One of the questions that always comes up is, like, where are you going to put this rail? Where's it going to go? And of course, lots of folks say, well, why don't we just put it on that CN track that runs sometimes mostly east of Highway 2? We did look at, either building next to or close to that CN track, and it was determined that it's just too costly. And it does have some economic challenges in that a lot of freight is moving on that track currently. So you don't want to impede that economic activity. So the decision was made that any rail between Edmonton and Calgary will be greenfield only. And so this will be a new development. We have not chosen where. I know we've received a tremendous number of access to information requests, I think from people who are hoping that we have a secret map showing where we're going to put it. We don't have a secret map. We have points: downtown Edmonton, downtown Calgary, Edmonton Airport, Red Deer. We do not have a secret map, but we have received a tremendous number of access to information requests, and it looks like they're looking for the map. But we don't have the map yet. We still have a lot of work to do to make this make this a reality. The other choice that was made, that's been made as part of the plan, is that we will be building high-speed rail. So the rail that goes from the airports through Red Deer, connecting the two cities, will be high-speed rail. That was proven to be the most efficient and effective option. If you currently drive Highway 2, it takes you, about 3 hours or so, depending on conditions. High-speed rail will pull that down to almost 2 hours. And that seems to be the point at which people will move out of their car and into the rail. So we are looking at high-speed rail as the choice, particularly between the two airports. So the 30-year plan includes, as I said, greenfield high-speed rail running between Edmonton Airport and Calgary Airport. We also included regional rail that would connect into the two downtowns or into the two airports. So this includes regional rail in Edmonton between our suburbs of St. Albert, Spruce Grove, and Stony Plain. And then in Calgary, between the suburbs or outlying communities. I don't think many of them would see themselves as suburbs, but Airdrie, Strathmore, Chestermere, and Cochrane. There is also a plan to perhaps to build regional rail between downtown Calgary to the airport, downtown Calgary, and Banff, given the volume of traffic that's moving out of the airport and into Banff for tourism purposes. So that is on the plan as part of the 30-year network. What we hope the 30-year network will achieve is 30 million one-way passenger trips by 2055. We hope it removes more than 5 million car trips from Highway 1, which is a highway that runs between Calgary and Banff, and then Highway 2, which is the major corridor between Edmonton and Calgary. And that over time it would connect more than 77%, over 70% of Alberta's population to rail as a legitimate option for moving inside the province. So we've released the plan. We are now in the process of engaging with the private sector. The government is interested in understanding what are the possibilities for partnering with the private sector on building out this network. So we will be spending the next 6 months engaging with private sector through our EFI process to determine what is the feasibility of private sector, what might that look like for the provincial government, what policy or financial levers are we going to have to deploy if we are interested in having, and if it is feasible to have private sector involvement in the 30-year network. We then will come back to government in early spring of 2027 and provide some advice to them on how they might start to actualize the plan in terms of involving the private sector. You can find out more information about the plan through the QR code, or if you have specific questions, please feel free to email us. We're always happy to talk about the plan and what we're thinking and where we are in the process. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's exciting and ambitious, and we certainly hope you got my vote from BC as a former Albertan. Next, we have Peter Scholz of Cairnstone Planning. He will be talking about like a broad overview of CN's planned discontinuance in Western Canada, but particularly the BC Rail corridor from Prince George to North Van, or not. Yeah, just go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, and pleasure to be presenting to everyone. This morning, I was thinking I need to summarize what are the thesis, what is the takeaways that I'd like the audience to have, and it's not on the slides because I just thought of it about a half hour ago. There's 3 success factors when we're talking about establishment of short-line services in the Canadian context when Class 1s disengage. Number 1 is for the provinces and the federal government, commitment to prevent track being removed, number 1. Number 2, willingness to provide political advocacy to ensure Canadian Transportation Act policies are followed by all parties, especially Class 1s rail companies. Number 2, local and First Nation leaders are actively championing rail continuation and economic development in their regions. We need local champions. And number 3, you need to have the right technical and business people in the room, local entrepreneurs, industrialists, working closely with the interested short lines and Class 1s. Those are the 3 points I'm hoping you will take from this meeting, and now I'll go into the details. Okay, so I was asked to summarize and discuss the CN discontinuances, impacts on the North American corridors as a network. Canadian National has completed, as of July 11th, a process, the first phase of discontinuation, first of 3 processes that are required under the Canadian Transportation Act. 1,219 kilometers of track are potentially on the chopping block across the country. I'll be going over those in order of priority for the national interests, and we'll get going. This is a bit of a context map. This map took me about 1,000 to 2,000 hours of work to put together. Red lines means there's an existing railway there. Orange lines mean that there is a track bed there. Green lines mean that an engineer or surveyor at some point, somewhere in the last 120 years has said you can put a train there. And yellow lines are my additions, which are topographically suitable to rail, but I have not obviously been out on a horseback to check the ground conditions. This map is meant to be used as an alternatives assessment approach to any corridor development, because if you can put a train there, you can put any other mode there too. So by just putting all the options on one map, I thought it'd be easier for folks to, in their planning on various projects around the country. I summarize it this way, is that what we're seeing is a lot of interest in connecting the lower 48 to Alaska and in connecting to resources in the Yukon and Northwest Territories, which I preemptively call the Athabasca Corridor. And those are the primary, in purple, those are the primary routes. And then there's always a lot of connection between how do you connect Hudson Bay to Prince Rupert or North Coast BC coast to create an overland Northwest Passage, and that's the purple brushes. That's a way of understanding that map. And then the red lines down below is basically the primary Western Canadian network. So that's providing context for the transcontinental system, especially in Western Canada, which is where most of the CN discontinuances will occur. I'll now go into about 10 discontinuances, and I'm moving through them quickly because I have 11 minutes left. The discontinuation that I believe is the most significant nationally is a closure of the right-of-way, a former rail line, now a right-of-way between Dawson Creek, British Columbia, and Beaver Lodge, Alberta. The reason this gets number 1 is if you look in the lower right corner of your screen, you'll see a copy from a map that was made in the 1930s. And there's a little note there, which I can barely read. But what it basically says is Canadian Pacific and Canadian National Engineers agree that this is the best route to the Pacific. That route is curving from Whitecourt to Grand Prairie. It was never completed. The Sangudo Spur was built from St. Albert to Fox Creek, but never continued all the way to Grand Prairie. There was a rail connection between Alberta and BC, which was discontinued about 25 years ago, creating a number of isolated spur lines. But if this is your 4th Alberta BC connection, this is your 4th connection from Alberta to the Pacific. And this is the route you take if there's a major, I don't know, fire in Jasper, some disaster happens in the Yellowhead to Pass area. I believe that, and I did measure the truck counts at Fox Creek. 2,000 truck trailer transports go by that Fox Creek on Highway 43 every day, which works out, if you assume 50% empty backhauls and 70% load, 6.4 million tons are connecting by truck between Grand Prairie and Edmonton every day. So just that alone, without considering the natural resources in the area, especially frac sands, it makes sense if you connect one of those two blue arrows, which is either White Court to Grand Prairie or the Sangudo Spur to the Grand Cache line, and then you reactivate Dawson Creek to Beaver Lodge, you will have a transcontinental corridor going to Prince Rupert ready to go. And you have a redundancy feature for Jasper in case there's a major Jasper there. So I would consider this to be the highest, should be a very high priority for the Canadian national interest to find a way to work with various parties to make that happen and not see the discontinuation, see the right of way extinguished and alienated. Moving on. I would consider the second highest priority discontinuation that is proposed is 22.2 miles from Enterprise Northwest Territories to the Port of Hay River. The background story is that there was a number of years of drought earlier in the decade, which lowered the level of the Mackenzie to the point where barging could not normally occur. And at that time, because of the drought, there was 2 years of major forest fires, which destroyed a portion of the track between Enterprise and Hay River. CN owns that line and has decided not to rebuild it and has set it up for discontinuation. That port, all those yellow stars are the 19 communities that have historically got their primary resupply is by barge coming from the Port of Hay River. And that importance to the network is why I gave this the second most highest priority in the CN discontinuation system. A lot of people know about Grays Bay. Grays Bay is kind of in the middle of that map on the north coast, but you have to get to Grays Bay. So when the Port of Grays Bay is first set up, you're going to need actually to bring the material for that primarily by barge from Hay River around through the river to the Grays Bay, or shipping from Montreal, but Hay River would be the most important. I am speaking to a couple of parties that are willing to work with the GNWT on a short line service there, but we'll move on. The third one is, I'll go over this fairly briefly because I've been working with Paul and Trudy closely on this over the last 6 months. 214 miles to be shut down between Exeter and Brackendale. The reasons for this being of national interest is by having good rail connection to Squamish, you have a way to, it's a release valve for overcrowding at the Port of Vancouver because Squamish is within the Vancouver orbit. It's a very good potential empty backhaul route, especially if you could build a new connector between one of 3 potential locations over to the 2 main lines. Where you see the B-bar, A at Ashcroft, Kamloops, that's CN and CP working side by side through the Fraser Canyon. This is difficult topography in this entire region. We do have a short line that's willing to take it over, and I'm encouraging at the present time that negotiations with CN on interchange agreements proceed post-haste and get her going. Part of the reason for the redundancy on this system is the Fraser Canyon. This is a satellite image approximately 20 kilometers south of Lytton. On this image, you can see the CP main line, which is the only CP line into Vancouver. You can see the CN line. There's only 2 CN lines into Vancouver. That's this one and the one that they're looking to shut down. You see the Trans-Canada Highway. You see cliffs on either side and a raging river, the raging Fraser underneath. How difficult would it be for there to be a event that causes a closure of 1, 2, or even all 3 arteries into Vancouver? This is why we need redundancy. There have been shutdowns. The longest shutdown was in the 1960s, was 50 days due to a landslide in the Fraser Canyon. Number 4, most important, is 53 miles in eastern Saskatchewan, connecting a town called Hudson Bay to the rest of the Saskatchewan grid. This is important because Hudson Bay is there, and it's called Hudson Bay because that's typically was set up as the collector point for potash and agricultural products out of Saskatchewan for use at Churchill. So while we're focusing on reactivating Port of Churchill, we're also in the process of shutting down the rail link that was built to primarily serve as the collector point for the exports that Churchill makes, which is why I say this is number 4. So I would, the track is out of use. There's apparently vegetation growing out of it, but the rails are still laid. So I would say that's number 4 and should be considered part of the overall Churchill strategy is to reactivate that because you're in the natural freight catchment area for Churchill on this one. I have no known short-line interest in this route. Number 5 is the Takla landing line. This route originally, the track bed was built all the way to Dease Lake. And there's 2 ways to get to Alaska that are suitable for Class 1 rail. I won't go into the details, I don't have time. But the BC one, this is it. And that's why Premier Bennett had the track bed built and then laid track a few hundred miles up. It hasn't been used for a long time. It does serve a bud car service to Takla Landing, or used to. There are some significant mineral deposits along it. I believe it's a thing to keep because should economics change where you can get to where there's a reason for a connection from BC to Alberta, BC to Alaska, I don't think there is right now. I think the Alaska to Alberta line makes a lot more economic sense. I can talk about that afterwards if anyone's interested. Also, there's another pass through to Stewart and the north coast of BC from here. So this is a redundancy to the CN main line below on how to get to the west coast. No known short line interest in this route. Matagami-Barrault in Quebec. This is a quite remote stretch, 139 miles. It's used for forestry and community resupply. I rate it lower because it's mainly it's not a significant, but if you know the shoreline of Hudson Bay, on the east side of Hudson Bay, the most southerly natural deepwater harbor is in a place just north of a town called Kuujjuarapik. On the right side, you see this screenshot, and you can see Matagami to Kuujjuarapik it's hundreds of miles. It's a long way. But if you shut down the Matagami line, you're shutting down the first 139.2 miles to get eventually to Deepwater Harbor off central Quebec. So I'm suggesting that EU Cree Nation should take an active interest in this. Mountain Park, Alberta, 25.6 miles. This track was set up to provide cold movement services to Lescar and the Cheviot mines, which are both now exhausted. It's actually a great place for a second Banff, and Banff Railway Company is considering looking at this route as a long-term investment opportunity, but that's about it. Portneuf is my last one, and this is a connector between Quebec City and northern Quebec. It's a lower priority. There's an existing connection from Trois-Rivières. It would be good to keep the right of way in case population growth in Quebec eventually warrants better connection between Quebec City and northern Quebec. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about our project, the project I've been working on next, and then we'll have Paul, I think, or is it Rachel? See, I have to look at my order. No, I've got Rachel after me. Okay, and then Paul, but I think you can stay seated and bring in questions. Yeah, Rachel, have you got a slide? No, okay. All right, we'll just look at this then. So I credit Penware actually for my taking this on. I was at UBCM last September when MLA Jeremy Valeriot he hosted a sidebar meeting with where he was thinking, maybe 10 people would show up to talk about the fact that CN had applied for a discontinuance for that 214 mile discontinuance, which would mean if things had gone on that line the way that they have gone in other places, it could have meant that CN could be ripping up the tracks in about 60 days. And so I really thank Jeremy Valeriot for having that meeting. Now, at that meeting, he expected 10 people. 30 elected officials showed up. And so that was just the beginning of showing the interest. And then he had promised that we would have another meeting, and in the interim, I ended up going to Penware's Economic Development and Rail Summit in in Portland and driving 13 hours. I'll have you know, I did not take 2 or 3 days to drive that. My flight was canceled. I looked for a rail. I looked for rail, sitting in the airport, waiting for my ride to come to pick me up. And there were no rail options. I did look. And so that's a problem. I could have sat in a car or in a train car instead of driving a car. Anyway, so on that panel, I met Peter. And Peter had, of course, this great sense of urgency for that line. And so we began to think of ways, how can we not let this railway be torn up? And I've been asked by the media, well, why do you care? You're from Prince George. Like, this rail line is like, what, 300 miles away from me? It's like, yeah, but if the rail line is torn up, I'm not going to get to Vancouver. like I need, the rail line needs to continue all the way down. So then in November, getting the timeline right here, in November, MLA Jeremy Valerian organized another, like at this time, a virtual meeting. And again, at least about 30 people showed up, maybe even more. And one by one, it was about an hour and a half, we heard the stories of mill and business closures along the corridor. Williams Lake, Quesnel, 100 Mile House, and Lillooet. At the end of the meeting, it was obvious to me that the mayors of the smaller communities had a much greater sense of urgency. The mayors of the Lower Mainland, which is what we in BC call anything south of Hope, others would know that as all the communities huddled up close to the American border. But we in the north, we live beyond Hope. And so the mayors of the Lower Mainland knew the importance of the line for commuter rail, for safer access to Whistler, because that Sea to Sky Highway is just brutal. But for the interior communities, and another thing for them is the potential to leave the congested area in the Greater Vancouver area and to be able to live in places like Brittany Bay or Britannica Bay and Squamish or Whistler or Pemberton even. But for the smaller communities along the corridor, it was a matter of life or a slow descent into shells of their former selves. They told stories of industry and businesses being strangled due to the obstacles not only inherent to operating outside the major centers, but also about the loss of human life due to accidents. And we all know about anybody who lives in a rural or remote area, you know what happens when the highway closes. It takes hours, or when there's a crash and there's a death, it takes hours for those roads to open up, and there's really no option for us there. And then also, they told also the stories about the continuing overdose crisis in our province, especially. And I would say that it's not a stretch to say that many of those deaths happen because of loss of hope, beyond hope. So the interior mayors had all seen the slow decline of their manufacturing base with the loss of short line service, which it had been originally when the BC rail line was built. The high cost of transportation for those that couldn't meet the requirements to get Class 1 service was identified as the single biggest factor in all those closures and business fails. So after that meeting, I gathered the communities, the mayors from along those communities, and we began to meet virtually. We managed to gain some funding to support the community engagement that we knew needed to happen, with our plan being to build knowledge and support for our efforts. So we were able to hire Peter to work with the municipalities, and my colleague, Elder Dean Dockey from Moberly Lake First Nations, who has been working with the First Nations and making all those connections. Wave, Dean. But I think I pronounced your last name. It's Doki, Dean Doki. I'm very sorry. There is a mountain called Doki Mountain in northern BC. Within 4 months, we had gathered council resolutions, letters of support, and interest from 7 First Nations and virtually all the municipalities along the corridor. So we achieved our first goal, which was to make it political suicide for any politician to agree to sell the line for salvage. And we just recently got that public statement from the province that they will keep the line in public hands. We achieved our second goal of community awareness for the benefits of rail very quickly. You will meet very few people who don't want the railway after hearing what passenger rail can return, that passenger rail could return, and the benefits of short-line rail. Our third goal was to find at least one viable short-line operator who was willing to do due diligence. We found at least one so far, and it's not a great secret who that operator is. He's on the stage. And we're very grateful because you need someone who wants to take that on. We wanted to ensure that communities would get more than just steel dust from a track running through their territory or community. So our fourth goal was to develop a First Nations co-governance model to own or lease the line to ensure the line met the needs of the communities that it runs through. We knew this would take time. Dean has done heroic work in getting, like I said, 7 First Nations and 1 First Nations Development Corporation to sign and submit letters of interest. And I'll tell one thing that we did was we wrote a letter to the Premier recently that Mayor Yu delivered by hand. And as I was everybody letting them know how we were going to construct the letter and all the signatories to it, we weren't doing signatures, just letters of interest. One by one, I had missed about 3 or 4 different entities of recognizing them. It was two municipalities and 1 First Nation said, hey, our name is not there, and pointing out that we wanted to be on that letter. So that was really, I felt bad for missing them, but it was really good that they had read the letter and said, hey, we want to make sure you don't miss us. So I have a question for all of us. In what world were we thinking that we could ignore small and medium-sized business and even big business that cannot fill enough rail cars to get a Class 1 rail contract? How can we ignore the business need or the transportation needs of the very people that are required to operate our industries and business? Think about that. Now imagine an energy, transportation, and resource hub like Prince George. Our city is 8 hours from everywhere, but in the center of everything. 8 hours from the Golden Triangle, with nearly $1 trillion of investment in critical minerals and mining coming soon. Imagine the amount of people and goods that will need to travel to and from our city. Now imagine that families could board a reliable passenger train to Vancouver from Prince George and eventually Seattle, instead of facing another long, hazardous, and tiring traffic or highway commute that takes about 10 hours. Passenger rail helps keep and attract young families and workers by making long-distance travel humane. Now imagine a community, those small communities, and you all have them, like Quesnel, Williams Lake, 100 Mile House, Lillooet. They are all key forestry and resource towns in the Cariboo, where small and medium-sized businesses get affordable freight rates without waiting. Can you imagine that? Without having to wait for big Class 1 trains that may never arrive. Not for them. Every hub city requires the communities around it to thrive. That was sort of my campaign, one of my campaign things that I said I understood. Every big business needs small and medium-sized enterprises around it to thrive. As in a wagon wheel, without the spokes and rim, there is nothing to support the hub. The missing middle of transportation is the gap that we have missed in economic development. Class 1s like CP, CN, etc., they are great at efficiency and at efficiently carrying heavy freight for big industry. So we celebrate that. But we have ignored that missing middle, passenger rail and short lines. Industry and businesses need flexible, fewer cars that Class 1 trains often can't provide efficiently. Short lines serve this niche. They are the feeder system for big industry. They supply parts, materials, and the services that keep large operations competitive. Without short lines, costs rise, and they get passed up the supply chain, and that hurts our exports. Short line is the flexible first mile, last mile connector for the whole ecosystem. And this line, the BC Rail line from North Vancouver to Prince George, is vital to preserve resilience. Peter has already mentioned that, what happens in the Fraser Canyon there. Remember the devastating atmospheric river events a few years ago? Highways and the main CPCN lines were washed out or blocked for weeks. The BC Rail Corridor provided critical alternate access and supply routes to Vancouver and the coast. It proved that the corridor's strategic value as a resilient backup for the Port of Vancouver when our primary routes failed. And I'm not even mentioning the corridor's potential for military use. Now, if this all seems too small, then let's dream a little bigger. If you think that's boring and, well, what's the big deal? So at Penworth, somebody mentioned this last July, and I'm stealing it because I don't know how to credit you because I forget who it was. How about we create a Pacific Northwest rails and trails and water tour? Start on the Oregon coast and go all the way up to Alaska. Cyclists ride stunning coastal and mountain sections, catching a train or ferry, and they continue all the way up to Alaska, coming all the way through BC on the Pacific coast, and through into the interior a little bit. World-class adventure that creates jobs and celebrates our corridors. Can you imagine? Wouldn't that be an absolute thrill? So in conclusion, the smaller BC rail corridor communities need reliable, safer transport and cheaper freight. The bigger communities want access to the interior for more housing and recreation. Businesses, large or small, need reliable and economical freight. So my call to action is very similar to Peter's. Become advocates for passenger and shortline rail. And I don't think we have any Class 1 operators here, but please partner with your shortlines and passenger rail friends because you need them more than you may think. Shortline and passenger rail is an opportunity for families, for entrepreneurs. It isn't just about tracks. It's about building opportunity. Thank you. All right, next we have Rachel. Thank you, Rachel Mackenzie.
Thank you, Trudy. I want to go on Trudy's holiday. I like bike packing, cycle touring, and train travel. So that sounds lovely to me. My name is Rachel Mackenzie of the Western Canadian Shortline Railway Association. We are an industry association advocating for shortline railways at federal, provincial, and municipal levels across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. And Bruce and Trudy asked me to join this panel this morning to speak a little bit about the current state of the shortline industry in Canada. It's significantly smaller than the U.S. shortline industry. There's just over 50 shortlines across Canada, about 25 in Western Canada, and it's quite a diverse industry. You have a lot of smaller operators in provinces such as Saskatchewan. This was often situations where local producers, a local government banded together to assume branch line infrastructure from Class 1s that had slated the infrastructure for abandonment and either chose to hire rail operators or to start their own railway and run it with very significant support from the government of Saskatchewan and provincial regulators within Saskatchewan. So you have a lot of small community-owned railways on the prairies. You also see within Western Canada much larger shortline railways as well. You look at Southern Railways of BC. In the Lower Mainland, the vast majority of autos that are coming in are handled by them, all the warehousing on Annacis Island. So it's a really diverse industry. You see short lines moving a lot of agricultural products, grain, pulses, specialty crops, energy products, providing rail, sometimes the only rail access into former and current forestry facilities. You see people utilizing short lines to move aggregates, to move oversized loads like windmill components, to move a wide range of goods. You also see short lines in Western Canada providing really important storage services that provide a pressure relief valve for the mainline network. So in Saskatchewan, for example, you see a large number of both empty and loaded potash trains stored on short lines. And a short line might have a big full train on it and it's nowhere near a potash mine. But what that meant that there were either changes in market conditions or issues at port or issues at the mine or congestion somewhere along the mainline network between mine and port that would have held up that traffic. And in those instances, you can put a potash train on a short line and you keep your Class 1 service and your mainline fluidity between the center of our country and port. to be much better. And I think sometimes people don't always realize that in small communities across the prairies, we have shorelines doing very, very important work to drive Canadian exports and to support the supply chain. And I think sometimes you think like, you know, what do shorelines really need to thrive? When do we know that they're doing really, really well? And something that a lot of things that people don't necessarily realize about shorelines is they often, if they own their railway right of way, because you can either enter into a situation where the infrastructure is leased from the original Class 1 owner and operated by the short line, or other instances where the short line owner purchased the whole railway right of way and adjacent properties, is that there's often a lot of industrial zone land connected to the railway right of way. So if you look back into the 1920s, 1930s, there was station grounds, there was places to store water. And so there's a lot of potential industrial development areas along short lines that small and medium-sized businesses can build on to gain rail access that's cost effective, and to work with a smaller operator where you're one phone call away from the manager and they want your business and they're really willing to work with you. And they're often situated in communities that want to work with you as well. So for a small company that maybe can't afford to build on the mainline Class 1 network with much more extensive development costs, or perhaps they're in an area where development opportunities on the mainline network are really limited, they can go a few miles down the road to a short line if they're fortunate to have a short line in that area, and have a very real opportunity for modal shift onto rail for their business. But short lines that are doing really well have diverse traffic, right? So in an ideal world, when you're thinking about shortline success, you're thinking about a railway that can move a variety of commodities and that have both inbound and outbound traffic to interchange. You also see a lot of potential for short lines to provide really, really good first mile, last mile service. So if you are a rail customer and you're wanting to move, it doesn't matter, like short lines can handle big unit trains too. So if you want to move a lot of traffic, that's great. If you are shipping organic grains and moving smaller traffic, if you're needing more complicated switching or handling, if you're needing a little bit more time, short lines are really, really good at providing that first mile, last mile service. Short lines thrive as local employers. Sometimes the Class 1, you often see in the news around challenges around employee retention and work-life balance, because the Class 1 rail network can be a really demanding industry for people to work in. And the shortline industry often offers a much better work-life balance while still offering competitive wages. So for a lot of rural communities, the shortline is a priority employer. And so those are really often a lot of the things that you need to think about. Also levels of interchange service. Class 1s are some of the most important partners for short lines. And so a thriving short line has a very successful relationship with their Class 1 partner and has a level of service at interchange that allows them to meet customer needs and to be able to move traffic frequently enough into the rest of the network. When we think about where we could take the shortline industry in Western Canada, where we can maybe learn from our American colleagues, there's some very significant support for shortline infrastructure in the United States that we don't see in Canada that would be very, very transformative, namely the 45G infrastructure tax credit for short lines. That's something that you often see in the United States to support tire replacement, to support infrastructure modernization, so that short lines can handle the volumes and track speeds that their modern customers are looking for to be competitive. And that's a very significant program to drive infrastructure investment. In Canada, we have seen significant federal investment into infrastructure, and we have some great programs like the Saskatchewan Railway Improvement Program. I know Minister Carr oversaw that for a few years. So there's been fortunate to have grant programs throughout the country, but they're often focused on specific projects. So if we're really looking at how to support either existing or potential shortline infrastructure in Canada, an American funding model that really recognizes the core infrastructure needs that are out there and supports rapid investment and modernization of this infrastructure is a really key way to support that.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you.
That's a lot of good information there. Thank you. All right, now we have Paul. Paul will share his, Paul Didelius, I didn't mess up that name. He'll share his railroad's view on the opportunities created by CN's planned discontinuances. Go, Paul.
All right, good morning. So Paul Didelius, I'm out of Idaho, and I've developed Columbia Rail over the last 20 years. I'm the primary owner. A couple of our lines have business partners, but anyway, we represent about 400 miles of short line, predominantly in the state of Washington and North Idaho, and own about 100 miles of that. And the balance is long-term leases with municipalities, economic development agencies, as well as Class I railroads in the United States. So I'd like to just mention that this 400 miles, we sort of collect broken things because they're usually available, and the price is right, I suppose. And you know, we've progressively looked to own our infrastructure as we can either raise the funds or convince the owners to sell. Railroad maintenance, it gets called maintenance, but it's really kind of throwing a new roof on your house, building a half-mile long driveway. If you've done things like that, you know stuff's expensive. So a railroad tie, for instance, it ought to last 40 years. We have ties that we find little date nails in from the 20s. So you can get a little bit more than 40 in cases.
They say 4 years?
40.
40.
Yeah. I mean, on heavy duty main lines, you may get 6 years out of a tie,
Okay.
but the target's kind of that 40-year time frame. Rail, we're running on some rails. They came spitting out of the mill with the little dates on the rollers, says 1898, Illinois South Works. We've seen Moss Bay steel. I don't know where Moss Bay is, but anyway, 1887. Wow. And, these are not ideal, but, we can run on old stuff. So there's kind of two ends of the spectrum. There's the resourceful, let's get her done, crawl before you walk, before you run. That's kind of one end of the spectrum. There's also the other end of the spectrum, which is let's not fool around. Let's build the railroad for tomorrow. There's lots of funding. There's engineering firms that want to help with that, and that's also great. And we as a company, we work to do what people need within a given geography. We love our communities. We want to do the best we can for them. And, just pivoting for a moment to the Class I railroads, they're amazing at what they do and what they represent. In a lot of cases, they, in the 1800s, they built these main lines and branch lines at considerable expense, for the most part, that they did on their own investors. And some of those railroads, they went broke getting themselves built. And it was the second or third company that sort of consolidated things. And those are the big companies we deal with today. Now, we value what they do, and we love our partnerships with them. But over the last 20 years, CN's a special example because it used to be a government entity. But the big railroads in general have become very organized around producing great returns for their investors. Now, if you're a pensioner or an investor, that's great. But along the way, they've lost that go everywhere, do everything skill set. And to the point that in cases, something that's a high value move, a high volume move, maybe doesn't even really happen because the rates are too high. Because when you as a major railroad can move something 1,000 miles in mass, why are you going to screw around with it, on a 200-mile basis? So short lines can do that if we have the A to Z, right? If we're just A to B, a capillary, I think is a good word, then we're limited on our connections and their enthusiasm for that business. Are they going to be truck competitive? You all know trucking costs are very high, and we can with our skill set, we can compete with that. But we are reliant on those connections also working. So, we would like to see kind of a patriotic return to railroading, and we do our part. As the railroads used to have passenger trains, for instance, and they used to go to these outlying towns that are still feasible. I mean, we can make some of these, the short line world can make some of these branch lines continue to work and even grow and prosper. So I could go on at
you
some
could go on at some length. Okay.
But at any rate, with regards to what Trudy's mentioning, as far as the CN discontinuances, we're not presently an operator in Canada. We're open and willing and intrigued by the line between essentially Squamish and Exeter. We think the former BC Rail is a neat franchise, and CN continues to service it, out of the Williams Lake area, going up to Fort St. John. There's a few of the peripheries that are getting a little threadbare. I would say Fort Nelson is getting very threadbare, and what that ultimately looks like. There's some conversations that ought to happen between enterprising short lines, whether they're Canadian-based enterprises or potentially American short lines. There's some conversations that need to happen with the CN to see about if some of those lines can be recovered and operate in a favorable fashion for both parties. There's a kind of a rail enthusiast. I know you're all shocked that there's men of all ages and children and grandparents that love trains, but there's an enthusiast magazine. It's literally called Trains. You might be able to find it at the shopping center. But they have an article this very month too. Actually, two very interesting Canadian articles. One is on Can-Do, which is a railroad contracting firm, which is quite large. And the gist of the article is in the Alberta industrial heartland, Can-Do is finding carloads. Basically, on their investment, they're building support yards, miles and miles of track, just outside of town here, where they can basically create business that dovetails right into CN and CPKC's current economic model.
All right.
And there's also one in Quebec, an article about a First Nations-owned group that essentially came to own a former iron ore railroad that had fallen on hard times. They've reestablished a passenger service, I think, twice a week. And this is very remote. I mean, this drops people off in the woods and picks them up later and goes up to a northern town twice a week. And along the way, they have also recovered some ore development in this town, because that's the funny thing about mines. I mean, sometimes, yes, they're truly played out. Sometimes they just go away for a decade or two, and then all of a sudden, here they are again. Well, if the rail line's not there, I mean, good luck with that.
Yeah, for sure. Very good. Thank you so much, Paul. That was just a really good. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so just remember you can put questions into the Whova app there. I have a question for Leann. How will the planned investments establish a passenger rail corridor also, and this might be a tough question, also benefit the efficient movement of freight throughout the province? Like, is there any, is there going to be any connection there?
No, other than we're,
Oh, your mic.
we're leaving. I think other than, we have made the decision not to use brownfield.
Yeah.
And I think that decision to not use brownfield will continue to promote the efficient movement of freight. And if we can get cars off of Highway 2 over time, because it is a huge economic corridor, then I think that improves the travel time, not only for those who remain on the road, but also for the freight that's moving on that highway between Edmonton and Calgary and onward.
All right. Okay, thank you. Peter? Yep.
Thanks. I'm just going to supplement that answer. Saskatchewan has a thriving short line economy with about 12 short line companies operating. Alberta does not. It's got 3 or 4. Government of Saskatchewan did not allow most of their tracks, Meadow Lake excluded, did not allow most of their tracks to be torn out at discontinuation. That gave time for short line companies to come together and take them over. Alberta usually let them tear out. So there is a massive rail desert in southeastern Alberta where there's still right-of-ways but no tracks. And I think that question comes from that perceived need. And it is really difficult to get tracks back in once they've been torn out nowadays in a populated area.
Thank you, Peter. First question is there any, or other question, and I think this one goes to either Paul or Rachel. Is there any interest between in short line railways to go across jurisdictions? And does that happen? I mean, it might already be happening.
Well, I mean, I guess it really depends on where the track is, in terms of what the opportunities are, what the business case is for customers on either side, where your interchange location would be. If expanding would potentially give you access to both Class 1s and if the agreements that led to the creation of the short line permitted that. When you do cross provincial boundaries, you become a federally regulated railway. So someone would go from a provincially regulated railway to a federally regulated railway, unless they did something like create a numbered company or something that was the entity that crossed the jurisdiction. And so that kind of has certain regulatory challenges that come with it. I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to what are the business opportunities, what are the needs, and how would that potential or new capacity that was created support the entire network and support the operator who was undertaking it.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add briefly that the short lines can and do lay track. There are the roadbeds that Peter references. Laying down track, especially if you've got an existing roadbed, you might be able to do it for $1 million a mile, right? Or at this point, let's just call it 1.5, 2. And that's worth doing. Especially when we can connect a couple short lines and build some synergies, build the network out. We see opportunities out there that don't have to go even 200 miles. We can move logs, we can move grain, we can move gravel, things even 20 or 40 miles. So that's worthwhile. It's kind of a case-by-case basis, right? Like what is the existing short line opportunity? Where is the existing network?
Okay, thank you. This is a question for Leann. How will Alberta's rail strategy integrate with, complement, or supersede existing municipal transportation plans and priorities in Edmonton and Calgary?
So I think that it'll complement because both municipalities right now have plans to connect their airports to downtown. Calgary's a bit farther along with planning for the Blue Line. And it's a bit somewhat easier in Calgary because it's a single municipality, whereas in Edmonton, they're going to have to cross into Leduc and then onto the airport So both cities have had plans for connecting their two airports for a long time. So we have issued, particularly for the Edmonton downtown airport connection, have issued a plan. I think if you're familiar in Edmonton with the low-level bridge, you know, there's been some really early conversations, or the high-level bridge, sorry, that with the replacement of that bridge, we're going to have to think through if we're connecting downtown Edmonton to its airport and we're going to be replacing a bridge, should we start to plan for the inclusion of a rail line along with just the overall passenger replacement and whatever else needs to happen, pedestrian traffic, bicycle traffic. So I think, and there has been plans, less so in Calgary than there is in Edmonton. Edmonton has had some planning for a long time about connecting regionally through bus service, fairly well-developed bus service between the three surrounding communities in Edmonton. So I think there is lots of interest in, well, how do we evolve that and grow that and maybe over time evolve that to passenger rail? I think that's not as well evolved in Calgary. You know, I think Calgary, last time I spoke to them, they were like, oh yeah, there is, I think there's a bus line between Airdrie and Calgary. I think so. So I was like, well, is there one? So, you know, I think that just comes in time as, you know, Calgary is a very different geography, very different, it's governed a bit differently in terms of its geography. So I think we're well aligned, and we are fortunate to have great working relationships with both cities, and there is alignment politically about particularly the airport to downtown connections.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Leann. I'm going to combine two of the questions. And I think, Peter, we'll start with you. Northern BC's industrial rail connections are at risk just as new opportunities in energy, agriculture, and inland to port trade is emerging. What specific partnership models between governments, rail operators, and industry do you believe is needed to maintain and upgrade existing corridors? And is it just time for Alberta, BC, and other provincial governments to return to owning and operating local and regional railways?
Well, that's an easy question. I'm going to go back to the 3 points I made at the beginning of my presentation. Where I feel that provinces and the federal government need to play the role is to be an active advocate for Canadian Transportation Act regulations, especially regarding interchange agreements between different railways. I believe that local advocacy and industry groups and First Nations need to work very closely together, expressing interests, and then the railways, of course. Now the question is about how is the model not working? And I think what we've heard here is that BC, the government of BC, built a line basically from Vancouver to Fort Nelson with spurs over to Fort St. John and Takla Landing, and then did a lease, but it's a 457-page lease, which I've read part of it, and it's a 999-year lease that the province can't extinguish. So it's, for all intents and purposes, it's almost fee simple to CN. CN, we've discussed about the strengths and weaknesses of the short line and Class 1 model. My argument is that BC is on the same path as Saskatchewan was 20 years ago. We have a very different topography. BC is a very different topography, very different economy, very different political situation with First Nations. Those learned lessons from Saskatchewan just need to be transferred over to BC, and what that's going to look like, I believe, is going to be track sharing agreements between one or more short lines and CN across the old BC rail system. And my opinion on senior government involvement is to really just be quite limited, just to be an advocate for, supporter of, and ensure that the existing regulations are followed.
Thank you. Okay, well, you know what? It is almost 12 o'clock. We've got 5 minutes left. So I want to give each of you time in the 5 minutes. So each of you just 30-second response, and let's maybe start with Rachel, or like your closing comments.
I would say that my closing comments is I think that there is a lot of potential and momentum to utilize existing infrastructure to really drive economic development in rural communities across Western Canada. And I would love to see increased regional engagement with regional decision makers and elected officials and community leaders and industry leaders and railway operators to drive success throughout our Western provinces.
Thank you. And Paul?
Sure. So we're here to help. We're interested to do what the community needs. So if there's a fit, whether that's adding a coach to our short line train to move people around at a basic level, whether that's building something new. We like the public-private partnership model, and we've done a fair bit of that. So yeah, we're here to help. Interested in the country.
Thank you. Peter?
Transportation planners have started doing these experiments where they take a type of plant or fungal matter and they put nodes in a maze and watch how the plant decides where it's going to do its root. And what the plant does is it identifies the shortest route between the primary nutrient sources, and it keeps that particular line route the thickest and most capable, but it never shuts down all the redundancy portions around it. All those little other ways through the maze to get from one point to another, it keeps a line open. Canada has to do exactly the same thing, and our history has been those little lines, we cut them. And that is going to hurt us unless we take action now.
Thank you. Well said. Yeah. And Leann, you get the last word.
So I think, when you think about a 30-year network, it seems very far away. And it seems, my kids will be pretty old by the time that happens. And so I think for many people, they're just like, yeah, it's a cool idea. And when I first joined transportation, one of the things they showed me was the original plans for the two ring roads at Edmonton and Calgary, which started, those plans are dated 1965. And they showed me the Edmonton map and they showed me the Calgary ring road and showed that the map for both cities stayed pretty close. There was some movement in Edmonton near Fort Saskatchewan. They moved the route a little bit. But that 1965 idea that we're going to need ring roads in Edmonton and Calgary, when both those cities were very small, very different places than they are now, probably at that time felt sort of like a ridiculous idea too. Like, we're never going to do that. We don't need it. And so, jump forward 40 odd years and we have constructed two ring roads that are full already and projected to get fuller as time goes on. So, I think planning and setting a direction is a really important function of government, and that government has a long memory. So, I think even though this is we're early days yet, there is a strong commitment and a strong consensus among many parties that Alberta will have passenger rail between Edmonton and Calgary, in the coming decades.
Thank you very much. And yeah, let's give them all a warm round of applause. So we didn't get to all the questions. I'm just noticing a really good one here. And so most panelists, are you available for questions after and for people? Great. So take that time, and we are out of time. But I think the main message is get involved. Don't let this resource that we have go to waste and be shut down. So do the advocacy piece. And as someone who lives and works in Prince George, I'm optimistic. With grassroots collaboration, like what we've been working on, we can revitalize and maintain our rail corridors for generations to come. Thank you to Penware, especially for hosting this important conversation, and to all of you for being part of the solution.